Hello and welcome. In today's video, we're going to take a look at building a model-driven app to track all of our applications and tools in our organization. It might sound kind of funny to build an app to track apps, but trust me, it is very helpful across multiple organizational levels to have such a resource built for managing everything. As an example, maybe you're in an organization, you have a lot of contractors that build a lot of these products for you, and all of a sudden the contractors go away and you're left kind of trying to figure out what to do, how to manage them, where are they all, how are they all built, what are all the resources associated with each one of them, and you have absolutely no idea where to even begin. An app like this will help with that because it'll tell you what resources are with which apps, what dashboards, what automations. Everything will be kind of centrally located so that if something happens where maybe an employee that builds a lot of your stuff leaves, all of the relevant information, the URLs, where to access things, how things are related, all of that information is centrally located so you can just click a button and see all of the relevant information for that app. Fair warning, this is going to be a lengthy video. Feel free to increase the speed so you can kind of get through a little bit quicker. I do the same thing when I watch a lot of YouTube content. I tend to watch a lot of solar and battery and some of the new technologies that are out there videos, and there's a lot of content out there, so I tend to speed it up a little bit. Feel free to do the same thing in this video. You're not hurting my feelings by doing something like that. I know sometimes I can talk a little slow. I also know sometimes I can speak a little quick, so feel free to also rewind and watch it again. But no matter what you do, don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you like this kind of content to make sure that others can get notified about it. It really does help the algorithm get this out to other people. All right, so let's go ahead and create our solution. All right, so let's go ahead and call this the Digital Resource Tracker. And then we'll go ahead and select a publisher. Now, if you haven't created one before, you can just hit the new publisher here and create your own publisher. This is going to essentially, everything that you create inside of a solution is going to have a prefix of your publisher, whatever you put in here. So it does help when you're looking at all the out-of-the-box tables if you have your own publisher. You can also use this one here, and then you'll have this prefix here, but I tend to like having my own custom prefix on everything, so we'll go ahead and select that. You really have to hit more options, so just ignore that, and let's hit the Create button here. All right, and creating a solution is just that easy. Now let's get into all the components of our solution. And the first things we're going to create are the tables. So let's go ahead and create our first table here. And we're just going to start from blank. For our table name, we're going to call this primary tool details. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. And let's start naming our columns. So let's edit this. And this will be our name. And we'll hit update here. So we've got our name. And then let's add a new column. And for this one, we're going to say it is product type. And for this, we're going to make it a choice column. And we're going to go with Power App, Power BI dashboard. And then we'll go with a Tableau dashboard. My preference is ours Power BI, but a lot of people do like Tableau. And then we'll put Jira in there. And we'll put maybe Pega. And you can basically put as many things that you might have inside of your organization. Just keep adding until you've got everything that could possibly be covered in there. So this is completely expandable to meet your needs. And for this, we're going to say no default choice. Let's go to advanced options down here. Everything looks good. So let's go ahead and hit the save here. And then we're going to add another column. All right, so next let's go ahead and add the access URL. So this would be the URL for getting into this. And we'll have URL here. And we'll hit save. And then let's add another column. And this time we're going to go with our completion status. And this again will be a choice column. And for our choices, let's go ahead and go with in development. And then we'll go with production, maintenance, and then we'll go with production pending enhancement. And then we'll go with canceled because projects get canceled all the time. So let's do that. And then we'll go ahead and hit save for this. And then we're going to add another column here. And all right, now we're going to write additional resources needed. And this would be a way to flag if there's some missing resource that we don't have. And we're going to make this a choice and we'll just make it a yes, no. And we'll go ahead and hit save for that. And let's go ahead and add another column here. And this will be our tool notes. And this will be a text, plain text. And let's go ahead and hit the save button here. All right, for now, let's go ahead and save and exit with the current list of columns that we've got there. And let's go ahead and save and exit. All right, our first table has been created and we can look at it here. So we can see, so if we go ahead and hit the 18 more here, we can see all the columns we just got created in here. All right, let's go back to tables and we're going to create another table. And this time, instead of the tables, which was the interface we just used, we're going to use table advanced properties so we can cover that as well. And for this one, we're going to call it app criticality. And we're going to go down here. I typically go with organization for these. And I haven't turned this on yet in the environment, but we're going to go ahead and select these options here. This is just for auditing changes and you're tracking your changes. And then I like to use the quick create form a lot of times. So I always turn that on, even if I don't necessarily need it for this particular table. I typically turn it on anyway so that I don't have to worry about going back and doing it later on in the future. For primary column name, you might be wondering, why don't I change this? Typically, I don't change this. This is like your primary column. So if you do lookups or you use any kind of like the model-driven app interfaces, this is the information that's going to be displayed. And one of the things I consider is this is a little bit easier because the primary column is always the same name in every table. So when I'm trying to find that information, it's just easier to remember that it's always the name for every single table. That way it's easy to find. But teach their own. If you want to change that, feel free to. Just keep in mind that it'll be different for every table, and that can, especially on a Canvas app side, make things more complicated. So let's go ahead and hit the save button here. All right, so first thing, let's go ahead and find our name column. So we'll display that here. And then we need one more column. So let's go ahead and add a column, and this will be description. And single line of text is fine, but let's go ahead and make it a little bit longer. So we'll go with 300 characters here. And then I typically turn on sortability. So let's go ahead and hit save. And then we've got the basic columns that we're going to need for this particular table. Let's go ahead and edit the table. And we'll create a new row. And our first one is going to be for not relevant, lowest importance. And then for our descriptions, we'll add those later. 2, low importance. And 3, we'll go with moderate importance. And then let's go 4, high importance. And 5, we'll go with mission critical. All right, there we go. Now we've got all of our descriptions in there. Let's go ahead and hit the back button here and go to our tables. We've got both tables now. Let's open this one up. And we're going to go ahead and let's go to columns. Let's create a new column. And this one's going to be our app tool criticality. This will be a lookup. And it'll be the app criticality and hit save. And that'll create that relationship so that when we do the lookup, it'll create that link there between the two. It's just a reference link, but it does create that. And again, this is just a different way you can do it. You could have done the exact same thing from this interface over here if I hit the add right here. So all of these are different ways to do it. I could also do it in here, and all I have to do is hit the add from here. So again, lots of different ways you can attack this for creating these different columns as part of these tables. All right, let's go ahead and hit the back button here. All right, let's go to app criticality here, and we're going to modify some views right away. So let's go to our active app criticalities, and let's go ahead and get rid of this. We'll go ahead and click on description. We'll resize this a little bit here and make this a little bit bigger here. and we'll hit save and publish. I actually could probably make this a little bit smaller, but I'll fix that later. Then we'll hit back, leave, and then let's go ahead and do our advanced find. And again, just do the same thing for all of these. So let's add this up there, make this a little bit smaller, just a little bit bigger, and save and publish. Then we'll hit back, and then we'll do our associated view adjustment. Again, all these are going to be the exact same, and these are out of the box options that we can use. I typically adjust all of them at one fell swoop. That way it's done. I don't have to worry about it and go back to it. So let's hit the back button, and then the more important one, which is our lookup view, because we're going to be using that quite a bit. And let's go ahead and remove, add, make this a little bit bigger, save, and back again. And then we'll do our quick find. I'm not too worried about the inactive because that's not going to be an issue for this particular table. So let's go ahead and just update this last view here. And then all of our views have been adjusted for this table in one quick go at it. And let's go back and look at our tables again. All right, let's go ahead and create another table. And again, we'll do this version here. And for this one, let's call it app contacts. And again, let's go down here. We'll make this an organization table. Again, we'll turn on these functions here, and let's go ahead and hit save. Now what we're doing right now is we're creating a table that we're going to house the information about our app points of contact. For example, maybe it's a project lead or somebody that's involved in the development of the app or the tool. And then we're also concerned with who's actually going to maintain this app or this tool. So it's two different types of people, and it's possible to multi-select. Now, out of the box, it's not like SharePoint where you have a multi-select person column inside of Dataverse, so you have to kind of find a different way to do that. And this is a good way to do that. Let's go ahead and hide these. So we'll hide this one. We don't really need this. We don't need this. And then we'll go ahead and create a role. And for this one, we're going to use a choice column. And we're going to say new choice. And we'll say app POC. And then we're going to have app maintainer as our second option here. And let's go ahead and hit the save button here. And then we're going to add one more here, and we'll say the person, and this will be a lookup to the user table. Save. All right, let's go ahead and add one more column here, and that'll be our primary tool lookup. And we'll look for primary tool and hit save. Now, because we're using this approach, we can add additional metadata. So we're going to say is primary POC, and we will make that a choice also, yes, no, and hit save. We can also add some notes. So let's go ahead and do some notes on here. And again, we'll do text, but we'll do multiple lines of text for this one and save. Now with something like this, one thing we do want to do is add some keys in here. So let's create a key. And we're going to call this one app user role, because what we're going to take a look at is our person, our primary tool, and the role. And this is going to prevent duplicates for this. And so we can have multiple people because the name is going to be different. But if we try to add the same person, we're going to get an issue because it's not going to let us add the same thing twice. So let's go ahead and hit the save here. All right, now we go back here. Now, one thing is the name column. So let's go ahead and look at this. And I mentioned we don't change the name, and I'm not going to change it in this particular instance either. Let's go ahead and scroll over. But we're not really using it, right? Because we've got all the columns that we need here. And in this particular type of table, this column is less important. So what we're going to do is edit this. And this is going to be an example of where we're going to use an auto number. And we're going to go ahead and come down here. I like to have a prefix on mine. So let's go ahead and take a look at everything here. And for this one, we're going to go ahead and call it app POC as the prefix. And I typically go with 5. So let's go ahead and start with a 5-digit. And there we go. So we've got our name column. It's an auto number. It will create this every single time we add a record, and it'll just be a unique identifier for this particular relationship or person that we've identified. So let's go ahead and hit the save button here. Now, some other things you could consider for some setup like this is maybe a start and end date for maybe they're the maintainer for the app for a certain period of time. So you would add a start and end date and you kind of keep track of the period. And then you'd probably want to make use of either the status column where you could make it inactive and active, or you could create another column and essentially do the same thing. To keep track of that. A lot of times I don't like making things inactive if I want to be able to reference it easily within the interface. So I'll create another column for that particular purpose. And those are some things you could modify this with. In this case, I'm just going to leave it the way that this is right here. All right, let's go ahead and do some view editing here again. And let's take a look at our active app contacts. We'll get rid of this again. All right, let's go ahead and we'll do our role first. Person is primary POC and notes and primary tool. Let's move primary tool over here. So we have it right here. We don't actually need this, so let's remove that. So now we've got our primary tool. So it'll list our app, and then it'll follow by that role. The person is our primary POC, and then any notes that have been added will be added. That looks good to me, so let's go ahead and hit save and publish. All right, let's hit back. All right, let's go ahead and go back here, and let's go ahead and take a look at the forms quick. And let's take a look at our main form. And again, we'll add the role, and then we've got the primary tool. Let's get rid of the name. Just hide that one. And let's put that in there. And then we've got our person and our notes. So we've got our primary tool, put that at the top again. And then the role, the person, the Ramakan, and there we go. Save and publish. And hit the back button here. And let's create a new form. And for this one, we'll do a quick create form. And we'll just call it quick create. Create. I don't think we're actually going to need 3 sections for this particular one, but let's go ahead and add primary tool up here. And then we'll add person. And then we'll add the primary point of contact, roles, and notes. And we'll put the role here. And there we go. And then for this, let's go ahead and hide that and hide this. And for this one, let's go ahead and also hide our label here. And looks good. So we'll hit save and close, save and publish, and hit the back button. And back. All right, so let's go back to our tables. We'll return to the views and the forms in a little bit. Let's go ahead and create some more of the tables. So let's go new table. Again, we'll do this approach here. Let's do app details next. And you might be saying, well, we already have a primary tool details. Yeah, so the primary tool details is more about the points of contact and relevant information about the overall project, if you will. App details is going to be a child table, so we're going to have it related to our primary tool details, but it's going to get into more of the specifics of the app itself. So let's go ahead and build that out. And again, we're going to switch this to organization, and then we'll select our common 3 options here and hit save. Now we're going to have about 6 or 7 different tables that we're going to add, and it's basically to keep track of all the different types of data related to the apps. So for this one, let's go ahead and again, we'll start off by hiding some of these columns that we don't necessarily need to see that often. Sometimes the modified we do, but for this particular one, we can always add it back in there later. And we're trying to make this agnostic, so it should work for multiple different types of app architecture, not just like a Power App or something in the Power Platform. So for this one, we're going to call it a workspace container name. So essentially the area that might work in for this particular one. So we'll go ahead and add that in there and hit save. This one might also have a longer name, so we'll keep increasing these to 200. And we can always increase it later if we need more, or we can always decrease it if we need less. And then let's go ahead and add the environment or instance name. And again, we'll increase this. And these are the names I came up with. If you got a different approach from a naming convention, feel free to go with something else. But these are kind of what I thought made the most sense. And for that, we'll go ahead and this is going to be a single person. So it's going to be a single point of contact. So we'll just do a standard lookup. And again, this will be the user table. And hit save. And then we'll go ahead and add a workspace slash container URL. And this will be a URL field and hit save. And then we're going to go ahead and add our environment instance URL. Not all of these are required. None of these are actually being listed as required at this particular point, but you don't need to fill them out if it doesn't apply, essentially is where I'm getting at with that. So let's go ahead and add that. And then we got to obviously add our lookup. So we're going to call it the primary tool and our lookup and hit save. So now we've got our link back to our primary tool and all the associated information specific to the tool right here. And if we go to our relationships here, we're going to want to take a look at that primary tool one again. And this is common. It takes a little bit of time for everything to save, so we'll just hit the refresh button here. And then we'll go to our primary tool here, and we're going to want to modify this relationship. So we'll come down here, and we'll go with parental. And essentially what's going to happen now, if we delete the entire project, if you will, from the system, it's also going to delete the associated records from here as well. So it's just kind of keeping everything organized for us. All right, let's go back to our tables here, and we're going to create another table. So let's go with a table here, and this one we're going to call our dashboard details. A lot of apps have dashboards, and this is how we're going to keep track of that also. So let's go with organization, audit, leverage, track, save. And let's create a new column here. And this one will say dashboard type. And this is going to be a choice. Now, one of the questions you might want to ask yourself when you're thinking of choice versus, say, a lookup, choice means that in order to make a change to this in the future, you have to actually go into the back end of the app to make that change and then potentially publish it to new environments. If you use a lookup for this approach, then you could actually maintain all of these choices within the application. So you could have an admin section, for example, and then the admins could, within the application itself, make these changes. So that's also something to consider is how you want that to function. For this particular one, we're going to go with Power BI because that's our primary choice. And then we'll go with Tableau as our backup option. And you might be asking, well, you had the option when you created the primary tool of defining it as a Power BI or a Tableau or a Power App or all these other things. Aren't you kind of duplicating that? To some degree, yes, you are. But this is more, again, more like the project details, and now we're getting into the specifics of what we're talking about here. So from specifically from a dashboard perspective. So let's go ahead and hit the save here. And again, you could add other options if you use some other software. Feel free to add other options in there also. Those are the primary two that we typically use. So that's I'll keep it with those. Let's go ahead and hide some of these that I forgot to hide initially. So we don't have to worry about those. And let's add our next column, and this one will be workspace name. And that'll be a single line of text. And again, we'll just increase that to 200, save. All right, and then we'll just display our name field here, because that'll essentially be the name of this particular dashboard. So let's go put this back over here, and I'll put that in the beginning of this. All right, so now we've got all of the different fields that we're going to need for this particular table at this point. So let's go ahead and go back to our tables here, and we'll go ahead and create another table. And this one's going to be, so we'll call this data source details. And again, we'll make all of our adjustments here and hit save. And we'll hide our columns, and we'll go ahead and make our name column visible right off from the beginning here. Yeah, that'll be the name of our data source. So we'll just go ahead and move that over here, and then we'll start adding some of our other columns in here. So we'll do data source type, and this is where it gets interesting because you could have quite a lot of options for a data source, for data sources. So we'll go ahead and hit no, and then we'll go ahead and start typing some options in there. So we'll say Dataverse is the most obvious option right off the bat. And then we'll go ahead and say SharePoint list, and then we'll do a SharePoint document library, and then we'll do Excel. And to start with, I think that's probably a good start. You can always come back in here and adjust this. This is typically what a lot of your, at least on the Power Platform that you're going to use. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of things, whether it's Oracle or the number of options is pretty unlimited what this could be in here for. So, and again, you might want to use, again, a lookup is a great option for something like this because you could have to adjust this quite a bit. And then maybe you want to have it in alphabetical order, so it becomes a little bit easier to do on a lookup list because it's kind of automatically happens that way. But something to consider is maybe you don't want to use this as well, actually, why don't we do that? So let's say cancel, and let's close this, and we'll go back and go to our tables, and we'll create a new table. And we'll just kind of show this again. So we'll call this one data source types. And we'll go back here again, user group organizations. I kind of convinced myself that for this design, maybe that makes more sense to use a lookup table just because I can see that this will be requiring a lot of edits. So let's go ahead and hit the save button for this. And that's pretty much all we need to do with this one is just that. But we'll go ahead and make some quick adjustments here as well. All right, let's hide this. Hide these again. And then we'll make our name visible. Save that and move this over here. And that's it. Let's go ahead and adjust our views. So we'll do our active because we don't need created on. So we'll remove that, save and publish. And since this is going to show up in our lookups, we're going to primarily focus on our active, and then we'll take a look at our lookup also. So let's go back over here, and then our lookup right here, we'll take a look at that one and get rid of this. All right, That should be good for right now. Like I said, I would normally do this for all of them, but in the interest of time, we'll just kind of skip some of these other views here and move on to other things. So let's go back to our data source details, and then let's go ahead and do our lookup. Data source type, and this will be that lookup, and we'll data source types right here, and hit save. Then we'll go ahead and add another one here for our environment or storage location. And again, we'll do 200 characters for that and hit save. Now, some of these might need to be increased in length because some of the URLs can be quite a bit longer. So that's always a possibility in the future as well, as some of those might need to change. Let's go ahead and add another one here. And this one will be our location administrator. And that'll be a lookup. And it'll be a user. Save. And then we'll go ahead and add another lookup for the data source owner. And let's add a location URL. And that'll be a URL. So let's hit save. All right, and that is pretty much it for this. Let's create a new table. And this will be our automation details. And again, we'll switch this to organization, audit, leverage, and track changes. Now, this is not adjustable after, so if you were to skip this step, and I've done this before, sometimes I'm in a hurry and I completely forget to hit this, and that's why I kind of talk through what I'm doing to make sure I don't forget something. But if you do forget this and then realize it later, the only way to fix this for the most part is to delete and start over. So just keep that in mind if you make the wrong choice, that you may have some issues in the future. So let's hit save here. And let's go ahead and hide this, hide that, and this, and then we'll make the name column visible again. And let's go ahead and hit add. And this will be an automation type. And again, there are several options for this, but there's a lot less for the types on this particular case. So for this, we're just going to keep it simple, and we're going to say our automate and data flow. And we'll hit save. And then we'll go ahead and hit add here. And let's go ahead and do the automation owner. And for this one, we'll do a lookup and to the user table again and hit save. Now we could go through and add the environments and some other location type details like we've been doing on some of the other ones. Automations are typically all contained in the environment that you're working on it. So the only thing we're going to do in this particular instance is add the environment location and hit, yeah, that'll be fine. We'll make it 200 characters again, just to give some extra text room, and hit save. And then we'll do an automation URL. So we have a direct link in order to get to this item. So that'll be a text, URL, and save. All right, let's go back to tables here. Now we've got basically all of our core table structure built. Now you might be wondering, hey, when you built these tables, you didn't do lookups. And I actually did that on purpose. So there's a question of what's the best approach? What are you trying to do? We could do lookups and it would work. And it would allow basically the same functionality that we could do through other means. If you do a lookup or you do a many-to-many relationship, now that's probably a good question to talk about here also. So we talked about, we've got the primary tool details, so think of that as like your project, right? And then we've got our app details. Now, a project could have multiple apps. And that's kind of why I separated it, is in theory, you could have multiple apps that are related to this one project. I usually don't do multiple apps for a single thing, but it is common for the use of a model-driven app for one use case of the data, and then I use a Canvas app for a different use case. Maybe there are some things that are just easier to do on the model-driven app, so you've got that maybe for the admins, and then you've got a Canvas app that's tailored specifically to a certain subset of people or roles or specific data entry requirements. But essentially, that's why we split this up is we can now have multiple apps underneath of this primary tool. So that's one of the reasons. You don't necessarily need to divide this. So if you're not going to have multiple apps potentially under your main header project, then you could put these two tables together if you wanted to and make this a little bit less complex. But apps all have automations, dashboards, and your data sources, among other things. And you could add extra tables for some of those other things if necessary also. But sometimes apps share data sources. And I've got an app in one of my environments where multiple tables reference specific employee data, for example. Why would you recreate the exact same employee table when you could just use it once and then everybody benefits from the updates to the employee table? So that would be an example of a shared resource between various applications, and you need to be able to annotate that in some way. So you could do a many-to-many relationship and set it up that way, or you could do a joiner table. And that's what we're going to do today. Now, why might you want to use a joiner table? If you want to be able to assign additional information to the link essentially between the two tables, you can do that with a joiner table. You can't do that with the many-to-many relationship. So in this case, we're going to add some additional columns to some of these tables, and we always have the ability to add more in the future. You can't do that with the many-to-many, and even accessing the many-to-many relationship is kind of a pain with how they've built everything out. It creates it in the backend, so you really can't interact with it. You can still access it through something like Power BI, but accessing it from Dataverse, from this interface here, becomes kind of a challenge when you use a many-to-many relationship. So just kind of think through that. Joiner tables work great. The functionality is a little bit different. They can be a little bit more complex. I'm not necessarily going to go through all the functionality in this particular video on things you might do to make things a little bit more user-friendly and some of that stuff. But there are a lot of things you can do inside the model-driven app to even make joiner tables work really easy. And many-to-many relationships aren't perfect either in the app. So a lot of times you find yourself trying to do customizations there also within a model-driven app, which is also a challenge. So there's not really a super simple approach for how you handle some of these things. But there's some real benefits to using a joiner table. So we're going to go ahead and use a joiner table, and we're going to create those now. So let's go ahead and create a new table here, and we're going to call these app automation joiner, so it's very clear what we're talking about here. And then we'll go ahead and again change this. Now this is another option too, is you don't necessarily need the joiner table to have the same record ownership as you do for all the other tables. So you could, this could be a way that you change things up also. So, but we're going to keep things the same. Just keep things consistent here. Track changes and save. And let's go ahead and hide our stuff here. And then we'll display our name column again. All right, and then we'll go ahead and create our columns that we're going to need. And for this will be our app. And this will be a lookup. And it'll be our app details. And let's hit save there. And then let's go ahead and find our automation and our lookup, automation details, and hit save. Now, one of the primary things we want to add here is how it's being used inside the app. So let's go ahead and add a notes field, and we'll do a multi-line of text again. And in this case, 2,000 characters is probably enough, so we'll keep that the way that it is and hit save. All right, let's go ahead and add a purpose column. This one should be a little bit shorter, but we're going to increase it to, let's go with 300 characters just to give a little bit extra space on the purpose for this particular column or for this link here to the automation. So we'll hit save there. And again, this gives us the metadata for this relationship, right? So we can kind of define that a little bit. All right, so we want to set up a key again for this. So we don't want to create extra relationships when they're not necessary. So let's go ahead and hit that, and it'll be app and automation again, because we should only have one per automation. You would want to create a second link for the same automation inside the same app combo. So we'll just call this app automation and hit save. All right, so if we go back to our tables now and we'll look at our app automation joiner, there's one more thing you might be asking, okay, what do we do with the name column? So for the name column, we got a couple different options we could go with. We could go with, say, making it an auto number, but this is going to be showing through our lookup, so that might not be ideal for this situation. Yeah, you could do a plugin. I think most people plugins are probably more than they can handle, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about plugins because again, most people aren't great with doing the coding for those. Let's do an automation. So we're going to go to our cloud flows here, and let's go ahead and create an automation. Cloud flow automated. I generally just skip this. Doesn't have a ton of options for Dataverse, so let's go with when a row is added or modified or deleted, and it'll be added or modified. I can imagine you would go in here and modify the link between it, but just in case that is what you do, let's cover that situation as well. And then we're going to find our joiner table. So app automation joiners, organization for the scope, and then we're going to hit a new step. And now we're going to go ahead and get a row by ID. And for this one, we're going to do the app details right here. And then we're going to do the row ID is going to be the app. So it'll be the app value here. And what we're doing here is getting all the metadata associated with that record. When you do a lookup, you're essentially getting all the record information. So it's not super helpful without doing the steps to try to use it, especially for like a name column. So we need to get the name of the app, and we're going to do this exact same thing for the automation as well. And let's go ahead and keep organized here. So this is going to be the app details. And then let's go do a new step, and it'll be Microsoft Dataverse. And then we will, again, get a row by ID. And this time it'll be the automation. So let's find that automation details. And the row ID is going to be the automation. And automation value. And again, we'll rename this. So let's change this to automation details. Let's go ahead and rename this while we're doing this. So this will be our app auto name update, joiner name update. And let's go ahead and save right away, just to make sure that we don't have any issues. Then we're going to hit new, and we're going to do update the row now. And this will be our app joiners. And the row ID will be from the trigger. So it'll be right here. And then we'll rename this one. And we want to update the name column. So let's go find the name column here. And let's use some dynamic content now. So we've got name, and it'll be our app first. And then we're going to do our automation. And that'll be essentially our name for this. All right, let's go ahead and save that quick. All right, looking pretty good there. Now, hopefully what you're asking is, okay, so you did an added, but you're also doing it when it's modified. And the act of doing this, especially when it's first created, modifies it. And how are we going to stop it from an infinite loop? That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to break the loop. And a good way to do that is we want to put something in right here before we do this update to stop it. It'll still run twice, but let's go ahead and add an action here. And we're going to go ahead and compose. So let's find the compose option here, and then we're going to put an expression. And what we need to do is we essentially need to build the name. And what we're creating here, we want to build that here. And we want to then do a comparison to say, okay, if they're the same, then stop running. And this is basically how this is structured. So we want to put a concat, and then we want to class, and we want to make sure we get our outputs from these different steps here, and the name fields in particular. Now the names are the logical ID names, so that's what we're going to type over here, and it's going to be like that. So this is our prefix essentially, and then that name column for this particular table, and then we add the comparison here. So we added that little hyphen in there, and then the comparison on the other side, right? So the automation side is over here. And again, same name, and we hit OK. So we've got that in there. Now what we want to do is do a comparison. So let's go ahead and add an action, and we want to add a condition, and we want to say name. For this one, it's going to be this name is equal to our compose outputs. If yes, then we want to stop there. And if no, we want to update. So we're going to go ahead and move this in here. And there we go. And let's go ahead and save. Now it is possible that if we formatted anything wrong in here, it will fail. So we'll be looking for that specifically. Maybe we added a space or, any number of things. So we're going to be looking for that when we do the test on this. But we should be good. Let's go ahead and rename this just for consistency. So we're going to be composing our name comparison, and our condition is name check. All right, let's click one more time here. I don't like infinite loops, so let's just make sure everything looks good. And yep, looks good. Okay. And there we go. Now this will also avoid, if you're just making changes to the notes, it won't run, right? So it's only looking for a name change. And so what is the expected outcome of this is we create something, it's going to run, and it's going to run a second time, but it's not going to do this update the second time through. So you're always going to have two runs of this when it runs through. All right, let's go ahead and head back here and take a look at our tables. So that is our app automation joiner table. And now we can go ahead and create the next table. All right, so let's go ahead and create a table here. And this one's going to be our app dashboard joiner. And again, we'll go ahead and make our adjustments and save. And I always get everything ready so I can actually use this in the future. So let's go ahead and hide all that stuff. And then we'll go ahead and add our app lookup and app details and save. And then we'll do our dashboard lookup. And there we go. All right, let's go ahead and add notes. And that'll be a multi-line. And we'll hit save. And then we'll add is primary dashboard. It's entirely possible that you'll have multiple versions of dashboards, and there might be considered a primary or an alternate. So one might be primary or alternate. You might actually have a couple primaries, but this helps identify maybe what is more important as far as your dashboards. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll just do a choice column for it and hit save. And then another column that might make sense in here is locations accessed. Might be a somewhat helpful in here. And we'll go ahead and for this one, increase to plain text. And I don't think we're going to need 2,000 characters. We'll drop that down to 1,000, but I do like the idea of having multi-line for this particular one. So let's hit save there. And that's a good start for what we might want inside of a joiner table for the app and the dashboard. Now, same thing as before, we've got a name column. So let's go ahead and expose that here very quickly. And just like before, we're going to make a key for this one. So let's create a new key. And that'll be our app and dashboard. And we'll call it the app dashboard key, so we don't have any duplicates of the relationship here. And then again, we got to go and make the cloud flow for this. So let's go ahead and create a new cloud flow. Automation, automated, skip. And again, it'll be when a row is added or modified. And then we'll go ahead and add this in here. And we'll do a added or modified. And this will be our app dashboard joiners, scope of organization, and then we'll create our new step here. And then we'll get a row by ID. And again, this will be our app details. And the row ID will be the app value. And we'll rename this one again to be app details. And then we'll go ahead and change the name here to app dashboard joiner name update. So we can save. And let's go ahead and add another step. Microsoft Dataverse, and we'll go ahead and get a row ID again. And this will be our dashboard details. And we will use the dashboard value for this one. And then we will rename this dashboard details. Save. And then we'll do a new step, and this time we'll just do the compose first. A lot of times I do this after the fact. I do the basic, and then I go back in and kind of add the extra tweaks that you have to do. And let's go ahead and add our expression here. All right, and I went ahead and pasted this in there. A lot of times I just have previous examples of this, and I just use that and update it in there. In this particular one, all we needed to do was change dashboard. And if we keep going over here, we'll see that essentially the only thing that changed was dashboard here, and then everything else is the same. And again, that's one of the benefits of using the name columns as your primary on everything. So it keeps things very simple and clean. So we'll hit OK there, and let's go ahead and add a new step and hit condition. And then again, we'll put that name from our trigger in here, and then we will say our outputs, and if it's equal, then we don't want it to do anything, and if it's not equal, we want to go ahead and update. So let's go here, and we will hit update down here to update that row, and let's go ahead and app dashboard joiners, and we will find the row ID here, right here. And then we will go to our name column, and we will go ahead and add the name. So look for name here, and it is our app details space, and then we want to add our dashboard, and there we go. And now we've got everything updated. Let's go ahead and save. And let's go ahead and just kind of look everything over. I forgot to change the names here, so let's go ahead and do that. So this would be our name comparison, and we can call this the name check and hit save. All right, let's go back and we will work on our next table. And again, now we're going in order here. the automation one. We've got the dashboard one. So let's do the data source details next. So let's go hit new. And then we'll have table, app, data source, joiner. And again, we'll modify things down here. Organization, change this, change this, change this, and hit save. All right, let's go ahead and add our lookups. So this will be the app and a lookup here and app details right here, save. And then we'll go ahead and add our data source, lookup, and data source details right here and hit save. And then we'll add our notes. I always find value in having a notes column here, so that'll be a plain text, and we'll go ahead and hit save. And then we will go ahead and let's go ahead and add a column for the purpose again. Let's put that in there. And again, for this one, we'll just make it a little bit longer. We don't need quite as much. So we'll hit save there. And then let's go ahead and add another benefit possibly here is whether the data source contains PII. So we'll go ahead and make that a choice column. And let's go ahead and hit save there. Maybe we want to add another column here for our security classification. Maybe we have sensitive information and we want to make sure that it's identified. Typically, PI would be a higher level, but that's a great example of why something like this is helpful. So let's go ahead and have no, and we'll go ahead and put in here. Maybe it's publicly available, so we'll put public, and then maybe it is internal only, and then we've got maybe confidential, and then we've got maybe just restricted access. And you might say, well, a couple of these could be restricted access or confidential, right? So it's just a more secure, more level of restrictions is the way I'm looking at this. So this is like you're wide open. This is kind of like your organization, or maybe your team, or however you want to define that. And then you got some confidential, which means, hey, it might be even more condensed, less people. And then you've got your restricted that may have only a couple of people that have access to that data. And let's go ahead and hit save. And one more for this one is how are we connecting to this? So maybe we want to have a connection method and some choices that we could put into there. I think that's probably the best option here is a choice column. Let's go ahead and go with a direct connection, kind of like what you would accomplish with, say, like Dataverse or SharePoint potentially. Then we'll have an API option here, and then maybe there's an import. Maybe you're getting it from someplace else. A lot of times you need a gateway when you're using, like, say, for example, SharePoint Online versus SharePoint. You might need a gateway of some sort in order to access that. There could be other options, but I think that's probably a pretty good start point. So we may have to update those in the future. Let's go ahead and hit save there. All right, let's go ahead and add a primary key again. So let's go ahead and select our app and data source, and we'll call this the app data source key, and hit save. And if we go back to our app joiner slicer here, we've got, I forgot to hide this, so let's clean this up, I guess. And then we've got to add our name column again. So let's go ahead and add that in there and save. And then we can go to our cloud flows. So again, we got to create a cloud flow for this and hit automated, skip. And we'll go ahead and do this right away too. So we'll call app data source joiner name update. And then we'll do Microsoft Dataverse again, and we'll do modified. And then we'll do our added or modified again. And our table is going to be the app data source joiners, scope of an organization here. And then we'll do a new step. And then we'll do our get functions here. Get a row ID. This should be coming pretty standard at this point. So let's go ahead and do our app details. And let's do our app details again. Oops. And then we've got our app field value. And let's go ahead and rename this. Oh, I already did that. Let's do the next one. So get this here, get, and then let's go ahead and do our data sources. And there we go. And our row ID is going to be, again, data sources, value, and let's hit a new step here. And this will be our compose. And let's go to the expression. All right, and let's rename this one quick. And this will be our data source details. And this will be our name comparison. And a new step of a condition. And again, we'll do the name from the trigger. And we'll do our outputs here. Add an update. What am I doing? Update. And here we go. So we got our app data, source joiners. Our row is our app data source joiner. And the name column is right here. So we will do name. And again, we'll start with our app. And then we will end with our data source details. All right. And condition, rename, name check, save. All right, let's go ahead and hit the back button here. And then from here, let's take a look at our stuff again. So we've done our automations, our dashboards, our data sources. We are now done with all of our joiner tables here. All right, let's go back to our tables. All right, so let's take a look at some stuff first before we decide to go into the app. So there's a couple things that we might want to adjust, especially in these joiner tables. So let's take a look at these again. Now, we created essentially a link, the lookup to the app, and then we looked to the automation in this particular case here. Let's take a look at the relationships that we've got here. So we want to adjust these. So we want to know what do we want to have happen when an app is deleted. We don't want this joiner relationship to exist. So we want to make sure that it's going to get deleted when the app is deleted out of the tool. So right here, we've got referential. In this case, we want to actually go to parent. And you can actually adjust this. If you go to custom, you can see all the different options that parent includes. So it's basically all of these. So if you were to select all of these, it would essentially tell you it's a parent, and it would set it as a parental relationship there for the behavior. But we want to make sure that when we delete an app, the relationship or this row essentially inside of this table is going to be deleted. So let's go ahead and hit done there. And then what do we want to happen with the automation? So in the case of the automation, we want a little bit different kind of a behavior. We want to make sure that you can't delete the automation without first deleting this row. So let's go back down here to the bottom. Instead of remove link, we want to restrict. So in order to delete the automation, you're going to have to first delete this link to that automation. And it makes sense because you can't delete an automation if your app is still using it, right? So that's kind of the idea here, is you wouldn't do that. And it's also a great test to see that if you've got anything, if you're maintaining this at the same time you're maintaining all your automations and your apps and all the related tools, if you go in here and try to delete it and it won't let you, then you've got an app that is still using item, whether it's a dashboard or an automation or whatever. So let's go ahead and hit done here because we want to make sure we add that in there. And we want to do this for all of the tables, and it'll be the exact same setup for each one. So let's go ahead and go to the next joiner table, and that'll be our dashboard joiner. And again, we'll do the relationships, and again, our app will have that parental. So let's go ahead and set that to a parental and hit done. And then let's go to dashboard and do the same thing here, but now we're going to restrict delete and hit done. And then let's go to the next joiner table here. And again, we'll do the relationships, app, and then we'll come down here and parental. And then we'll come over here to then we'll do our data source. And we're going to restrict and hit done. All right, so that should be our adjustments for the joiner tables now. Now, one more adjustment. I think we're going to adjust our app contacts. So in this case, we set this up a little bit different, and it was more for demonstration purposes. So you'll notice that we've got our name here, and we set this to auto number. And I don't know that I want an auto number, and you can change this. So you can go back to plain text. I think what I want to use for this is I think I want to display the name in here. That way, if we ever do a lookup with this information, it'll display a name versus an auto number. It's a lot better information. Let's go ahead and hit the save button here. Now this means we also need to make a cloud flow. So let's go back to cloud flow, and then we'll hit new, automated. Again, we'll skip there. And then we'll do a Dataverse again, and we'll do when a row is added, modified, or deleted. And in this case, we'll do added or modified again. So let's go ahead and do that. And in this case, it'll be the app contacts. So let's go ahead and click that. And again, our organization. And then we'll hit a new step. Now, in this case, what we need to do is we need to get a row. And it's going to be the users table. So let's go to the user. And where's our users table? Right here. And for our row ID, we go to person, and it's going to be the value. So that's going to get our user. So let's rename this. Now, in this case, it's a little bit different of a setup. So what we can do is hit our new step and hit condition. And in this case, we have our name. So it's the field that we've created inside of our item here. So when a row is added or modified, so we can select that. And we can say if it's equal to the full name. And if it's yes, then do nothing. And if it's no, then we're going to hit the update. So we'll hit Microsoft up, Dataverse, update a row. And this will be our app contacts. And our row ID will be, again, our app contacts right here. And then our name for this is going to be full name. And let's go ahead and hit save. Oh, I forgot to change the name. So we'll change the name of here quick. And we'll say app contacts name update. And we'll go ahead and change the name here. User check. And we'll hit save again. All right, so now whenever we add a user or modify, again, I wouldn't recommend doing that if you make it inactive and then you'll have the historic record. But if somebody doesn't do that, what you will be doing here is it'll also detect modifications. So if you select a different person, it will update the name field so that when a lookup is used, the name is what's going to be displayed there predominantly. So it's going to show that updated name regardless whether you just change it, and then it won't do an infinite loop during these processes. All right, let's go back to our main app. So now we've got 12 tables and we've got 4 cloud flows. We've got essentially 12 data sources and we've got our 4 cloud flows. It seems like a pretty good amount of stuff for us to build our application. So let's go ahead and hit new app here, and we'll hit model driven app. And we'll call it our digital resource tracker. Hit create. And at this point, you've got a couple different options. If you hit the add page here, you'll probably get the generative AI build it. It's good. I don't mind it. But what I've found when using generative AI is you have to be very, very precise on what you're looking for. And it will build pretty much everything. So in my opinion, it ends up being a little bit more work than if I was just using the standard add a page option here. So if I want to describe my page, I would, use this, which is what's going to happen if you click here. Or you could use the previous approach, which is the Dataverse table. And obviously, I've been doing this for a lot longer, so this is what I'm more familiar with. I have played around with this, but what I've found with this is you can get some really good outcomes if you're very specific and you have a very thought out plan on what you're looking for. This works great. But a lot of times, I find this is still a little bit easier to work with. So for this, we're just going to go ahead and use this Dataverse table. I might think through a really well-defined project in the future and demonstrate how this would work. But for right now, we're just going to use the Dataverse table. And if we hit search here, most of the ones that we want are detail. So let's find our primary tool details. We'll select that and we'll add that first. So that's going to be our first. And I like to add them in the order that I'm going to use them. You can't always reorder them if you click here and you do move up and move down. But I like to take my time and kind of set it up from the beginning. And next is the app. So you have a tool or a project, and then you have an app associated with it. So we'll select that next. And then next thing that makes sense to add would be your data sources. So we'll do data source details, add. And then after your data sources, you've typically got your automation. So let's add that one next. That's our automation details. And then, so let's do, oops, hit the wrong button there. Let's just do details. So we got automation details, and then we're going to do our dashboard details so you can kind of see what this looks like when we add both at the same time. So there we've got both, and in this case, they're in the proper order. So we've got our tool, which is the parent, your app, and then you've got your children here to the app listed as well. And you might be saying, okay, what do we do with all those joiner tables? Don't worry, we're getting to that as well here in just a bit. All right, so I think we're going to change the sizing here. So let's make this a little bit smaller. All right, there we go. So if we look at this, we've got our name, our dashboard type, our URL, and our workspaces. I did go through and adjust all the different views outside of this video. I did some of the views in here, but this video would have been hours long if I had done all the views as part of the video. So I went through and cleaned up most of the views. So we'll have kind of the starting point for all these here. Now, as far as the process, right? So let's see what happens. If we click the new button here, we've got our primary tool details. So this would be where we would create that experience here. And this is how you would add each of the individual elements. So you would add your app details, you would add your data sources, your automation details, and your dashboard details. That's how you would essentially do this, or you can come in here and see all the different apps, and you can see all the different data sources. Each individual view shows you everything that you've got added into the app. But when we create a new one here, we want to be able to do two things. We want to be able to obviously do this portion, which is your essentially your project information or big picture of that particular tool. And then you want to be able to identify the apps associated with it. So we want to have that function on here. So we're going to want to modify this form to allow for that. And then we're also going to want to add our contacts. So we'll have essentially our contacts on here, and then also our app selection on this particular page here. And then on our app details, when we click a new one here, we want it to be all the app information. And we'll probably change this form too. So we'll split it into two columns of data. And then we also want to have all the associated elements with this app. Now, that's how I've chosen to set this up. If you wanted to do it a little bit different, where you click here and you see everything associated with the tool in one interface, you could do that also. What you might want to do is go back to the joiner tables and add the primary tool as a lookup also. That way you can filter this view here so that it only shows items that are associated with the primary tool, because that's essentially how this works. Is it's going to show you everything that's associated with that primary tool. And because our app details, you have the option to select a primary tool. This is one that we didn't create a joiner table for. Typically, your apps are associated with a specific project, if you will, not necessarily multiple projects for the building of those. So that's why we chose to do app details as not having a joiner table. And then we've got 3 joiner tables for these because multiple apps could use data sources, automations, or dashboards. Although dashboards a lot of times are also app specific, but it's always possible that you would share. I've got a couple that are actually shared, so that's why it made me think to do that. But this also could have just been a standalone, just like your app details where you didn't have a joiner table. But there are situations where you do share dashboards, so that does happen. But yeah, so we're going to modify the views next. So let's go ahead and we'll first take a look at this view here. So let's go ahead and expand this, and we can edit it right from here. So let's go ahead and edit this, and we'll save and continue. So I do like this layout here so far, but what we're going to do is add a section right down here for that app selection. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we want to do an editable grid. So we'll go ahead and add an editable grid. And in this case, we're going to be looking for our app details. So let's go down here, app details. We don't want to use inactive, but this is where you would select if you wanted to create an entirely different view. You could do that here as well. In this case, we're not going to add any subgrids on here. And it looks like everything else, I typically don't have to change much here, but this looks good, so we'll hit done there. And let's go ahead and hide the label here, and then we'll say associated apps. And again, we're going to want to show related records, so we only want to see things that are associated with the primary tool here. And then we want to have active contacts. Oh, actually, it reset things, so we don't want that at all. That's not what we're trying to do. App details, and there we go. So now we're on the right thing there. Now, if you want to restrict their ability to select a view, and in this case, I'm not going to, maybe they want to see inactive, for example, because that's really the only 2 options they've got here. If we look at their views, is you got active and inactive. If you wanted to restrict their ability to only the active, you could do that by doing that also. So you just uncheck this, and in this case, I am going to leave it unchecked, but you can do it where in the case of like contacts, for example, it's unlikely they're going to make an app inactive. But in the case of contacts, that's definitely possible, is that you might make your contacts inactive. So let's go ahead and save and publish quick so that we've got this portion of it done. Now, the other thing we want to do as we're saving this thing is figure out what our required fields are. You'll notice I didn't make a lot of things required, and I also left a lot of things as default, so I didn't necessarily make things optional versus required. And in the case of the app details here, they are going to enter the primary tool names. If you want to make this required, all we would have to do is edit the table column, and we'll get this little pop-up here, and we'll go ahead and make that business required and hit save. And now in order to fill this out, they're going to have to fill in that requirement. And let's go to our app tool criticality. I also want to make that field required. This is required and hit save. Now, I think the rest of these are good as optional for right now. Default is going to be no, so this is never going to be not selected. You can only do yes or no for yes, no columns. There's no unselect option there. And let's go ahead and hit save and publish. All right, looks good. Now, let's go ahead and add another 1 column section. And this is going to be for our contacts. So we'll do an editable grid, and then we'll do app contacts right here. And again, we're going to do our active app contacts. And we know, all right, there we go. And hit done. And again, we're going to do the show related records. It'll reset everything. I could have sworn in the old days they used to have an option for checking that right in there. I might be thinking of the Power Apps editable grid, which is another component that you can use. I use that quite a bit also, but again, for this one, I'm going to allow my users to change so they can show both options. And let's see. Yeah, I think that's good for right now. And we'll get rid of the section header here, so we'll hide that label. And yep, I think we are good now. So let's go ahead and hit the save and publish. For this particular one, we elected to not allow them to change their view. If we come down here, you have the option here of changing the view. So that's how that would be visually how you're going to see the difference between the two. So they'll have the option to switch and see all their inactives right here. Now, one of the things that we may want to consider, we did adjust our name column here. So there's the question of how does this work, right? So we made the name column the same as the person, which is great. So that works great as an option. Maybe the name column should be the primary tool dash name, and that's a consideration. So when you have that name column, uh, that can be helpful for identifying what you're looking at. Because if you're going to enter in people and it's going to be a contact per app, and it's going to be essentially the same contact could be a contact for multiple apps, right? Because I could, and I do, build lots of apps. So I would be a contact for this primary tool, the next primary tool, and multiple primary tools after this. So that name column as a lookup might be beneficial if it identified primary tool name. So just dots on, that's why I do a lot of the stuff right here. After we've got all the underlying tables, I want to make sure, hey, did we consider everything? How's this going to be working? The name columns, for example, they can't be required if we're using an automation. So when we get to those pages, those are some things I'm going to look at is make sure, hey, this can't be required because it's going to be blank. The automation is going to take care of filling that in for us, so it can't be a required field. So those are some of the things that we're going to take a look at as we go through these different pages. But for now, I think we're pretty good with this. Now, one consideration for your app contacts. Right now we're listing all of them. So it's got the role of, both roles or all the roles are right here. Depending on the number of roles you have, another option you could do is you could split this up and you could actually create a view for, say, your maintainers, like the people that are actually maintaining these apps. That could be one view, and you would have a list of all the maintainers for the app in one grid, essentially. And then another role could be in a different grid. So you could do that also. When you're adding it, typically you have to select between the two, but you can actually do plugins and ways to make it so that when you're adding from the, say, the maintainer grid, it will pre-select maintainer as the role type, so they don't have to worry about it, and then you just put the information for the person in there, and then it'll show up in the correct side. We're not going to cover that in this video, but that is a possibility to do things like that. But for right now, I think this is good. So we'll have all of our contacts in one view here. Some enhancements we may want to consider is, the sort order. Perhaps we want the sort order by type, or maybe we want it by name. So those are some things that we would want to consider also with this process. Let's go ahead and save and publish again, and that will be good for this. All right, let's go ahead and hit the back button here. Now, what happens when they click app? So let's go ahead and hit the new here. Again, I don't like this particular layout, so let's go ahead and edit this and save and continue. Now for this one, let's go ahead and make this a 2-column. And let's break this up. So we've got our name, our primary tool, our environment. Let's move our workspace over to this side. and this one, and this one. There we go. So we've got a little bit better usage of space here. Now, one thing we are seeing here is we've got, this is a required field. We've got our name as a required field, but we don't necessarily have anything else as a required field. And maybe we're missing a required field here. Maybe in the app view, we should have the builder or the point of contact for adjustments to the app. That's a consideration on what we might want to add in here. And then what else? Notes. Potentially you want to have app-specific notes. So that would be something that you may want to consider adding also. I think I'm happy with the required fields at this point, but again, if you wanted to adjust them, all you would have to do is edit the table column here, and then you could change the settings for this. Let's go ahead and add another section here. So let's go with a 2-column section in this case, and then we'll do, again, an editable grid. And now we're going to do our associations from the app perspective here. So in this case, we want to add our joiner table. So we're looking for our app and then our different options for joiners. And we'll do the data source first, active, and no changes here. And then let's go ahead and add another editable grid. And this one, we're going to do our app automations. And then we're going to do another one. Inactive. Nope, we want active. I don't know why you would set it as a default of inactive. It should always just default to your active. And most of the time it does, but in that case it didn't. So let's go ahead and add a 1-column section because we've only got one item left. So we'll go ahead and add that in there. And then we'll add another editable grid. And then we've got our dashboard. So let's go find our app dashboard joiner. And again, active and done. Now we're going to get rid of our label there. We're going to get rid of our label there. And this one will be, again, our data sources. We'll call it associated data sources. And then we will show our related fields and reset. And make sure this doesn't reset on us again here. And then here, this will be our associated automations. Show related records, reset component. Yeah, that's why that should be just an automatic when you build it. It should just allow you to select your show related records. It's possible that we'll have inactive, so I think for this one we want to allow for changing the view because it's possible you'll create something and then you end up not using it, or maybe you put it into something else, so you would make that as an inactive. And let's go ahead and hit this one down here last, and this is our associated dashboards. Show related records, reset component. So again, it changed us here, so let's go find the correct one. And there we go. Now, if we're looking at this, everything looks good from what I can tell here. So I think we've got the fields that should be required are required. So let's go ahead and hit Save Publish. And let's go back. All right, so now let's look at the data source details. Let's hit New. Now, in this case, I don't think we're going to use this as much. It's more just a data entry. So when you're adding your data sources, this is the view that you're going to be accessing. But let's go ahead and take a look at this and edit the form. Because what you might want to do is change the requirement. So in this case, for the data source type, I want this to be a required field. And let's go ahead and make that business required. And you might be wondering why I didn't do this at the beginning. Well, for me, I'm more of a visual. I want to see the layout. I want to see how things are going to be structured. consider the missing columns question, and then also consider, can it be required or should it be optional at this time? In this case, you could make multiple things on here required. For example, the data source owner probably should be required. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can always change this later, but for the most part, this should be required. Most of these fields possibly could be. The location URL should apply to any data source, but the environment or storage location probably will as well. But some of these may not be required for every single option that you put in here, depending on the type of data source. So that's why I got to put a lot of consideration into which fields are required, because if it doesn't really apply and somebody's got to fill it out, they're going to question why it's required. What am I supposed to put in the box if it doesn't apply? Kind of a deal. But I think for this one, that looks good. Now, again, same kinds of considerations. Should we have a notes for this? Perhaps we should. Maybe we should have either a notes field and or we have the ability to do notes, like the timeline notes. And we're going to actually do that here in a little bit on a different area, but that's something you could consider. If you want to have like a chronological history of changes, that's a great way to do that. And for all of these tables, that might make sense because it's basically the data source. It's not the joiner tables. We're talking about the data source itself. So if you change something in the data source, that might be a good update to include in the chronological history so you can kind of see all the different changes. And perhaps you caused some kind of an issue in some other way. You can kind of narrow down what changes might have caused that through some sort of an annotation like that. So it might be a good option for all of these to include that. And in that case, for this setup, what I would probably do is switch this to a 2-column, and you would have that on the right side there. All right, let's save and publish, and then we'll hit the back button again. All right, let's do the same thing with the automation details. And let's hit new. And again, I think we're going to want to change some of these required fields. Save and continue. So let's make automation type a required field. I think the automation URL will always apply, so I'm going to make that a required field also because it is a lot easier to find the thing when they put the links in there. And then environment location, automation owner, we're going to make this one a required field also. And let's go ahead and save and publish. And go back. And our dashboard details. Hit new. And let's just go ahead and edit because I know that we're going to want to edit a couple things on here also. All right, so our dashboard type, we want that to be a required field. And we'll make this a required field also. And again, we're going to make the dashboard owner a required field. And save and publish. And we're going to hit back. All right, so now we've adjusted all of our primary views here. Now, another thing we want to take a look at is our settings. So let's go up here for a second. So if we needed to change our name, we could do that here. Change your icon. I always recommend changing the icon. I'm going to have to come up with an icon that makes sense for this app, and then I'll probably replace that also. If we go down the advanced settings here, we're not really going to change anything for this. Let's go take a look at our features. And let's go ahead and scroll down. And let's go ahead and keep looking here. I always recommend going through the features just to kind of see if anything's changed that you want to turn on. In this case, I'm going to leave things the way they are. I don't see anything that is earth-shatteringly new or might make sense to include. There's a couple that I would typically turn on for depending on the app, but for this build, we're not going to. We do want to enable areas, so let's go ahead and do that. And then upcoming, this is also a good thing to take a look at. I do want to turn on a modern timeline control and hit save. Now, these are all our primary tables, but we do have a requirement for other tables, right? So we have those lookup tables that we created. So we're going to want to create a new area. And if we click on area here, we're going to go ahead and edit the properties for this one. And this will be our primary information. And then we're going to click back here again and create a new area. And this new area we're going to call admin. All right, so now we've got our admin, and we're going to want to add a page here. So let's go ahead and add a Dataverse table. And in this case, we're looking for our data source types. And then we also want to add our criticality. So let's go ahead and find that. So that would be app criticality and hit add. And in this case, I think I want to move this up. So let's move that up here. And if we click on this, we can see we've got our name and our description. And if we click on our data sources, I went through and added a couple of data source options by default. And if we go ahead and go back here for a second, we click on this, our form is pretty basic. Now, in this case, I think I want to make the description required also. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll make this a required field and hit save. Save and publish, and then we'll go back. All right, so in order to switch, all we have to do is come up here. And again, we're going to take a look at our data source types. And that's our required field. So everything looks good here. Now, things we can do is if we didn't want to have this, we could modify the form so it's just the general because there's nothing really, no benefit in having related. So that might be something we want to change. Same thing here. We don't necessarily need to see the related. So that's something we might want to hide also. Now to remove the related, all we have to do is again, edit our form here. So let's go ahead and do that. And then in here, all we have to do is select this and hide, and it's gone. Now, another thing that we want to talk about is the name. So I said don't change name when you're building it, and that's true, but we might want to change the name here. So for example, name versus the description. Well, it's really the criticality. So maybe we should change the name here. And this does change your column name. But when we change the column name after it's been created, it doesn't change the logical name. So your schema name and your logical name aren't going to be affected by making this change up here. So when you're looking for it, you're still looking for the same things. Let's go ahead and hit the save. And then we'll go ahead and change the name here also. And hit save and publish. All right, let's go ahead and hit the back button here. And let's go back to our admin, app criticalities. And so now we can see the difference, right? So we have criticality, and you didn't have to necessarily change the column name because you can just change the label, but I do try to keep things kind of aligned in my app, so it makes it a little bit easier to find what I'm looking for. So in this case, we've got the criticality in the description, and if we go ahead and click on this, we're not going to have the related anymore. And let's go back to data sources. Now, same thing, we've got data source types, and then we've got the name. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do that, so let's go ahead and edit this form. And again, we'll go ahead and hide this. So if we select this and hide, and then we'll go ahead and edit this, and we'll say type, and hit save. And then we'll change this name also to type. Save and publish, and hit back. And I misspoke a second ago, so let me clarify something quick. So if we look at data sources, for example, in order for us to change this, you do need to change the column name. But on the form, you have control. So it's possible that if you change it on the form, but you don't change the actual column name, you're going to have a confused user because they're going to come here to look at this form and they're not going to necessarily see that, right? So if we come over here and we edit this view and we select this, you can see that we don't have an option here to really change the name of this. We can change the size and we can edit the column table this way, but you can't really change the name. So if you want to change the name in the views, you do have to change the column table. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. After I said that, I didn't want anybody to be kind of confused. So let's go ahead and hit the back button here. All right, the next thing we want to do is we want to turn on the timeline component here. So let's go ahead and hit the back button. And we're going to go to our table for our primary tool details. And we're going to go to the properties for this. Oh, we've already got it turned on. So what you want to do is make sure that enable attachments, including notes and files, is checked here. And then you'll have the timeline and the notes option. Now, the other thing, and I've been throughout this entire video, I've struggled with primary tool details as a name. And usually that's my brain's way of saying, hey, you've got the wrong name for this. And so when you start these projects, you don't always have all the names figured out for everything. And as you're building it, maybe something becomes a little bit more clear on what you want to call something. In this case, I want to change the name of this table, and we're going to call it Digital Initiatives. All right, so now we've got Digital Initiatives. Again, that's not going to change the logical name, but it is, I think, a little bit more intuitive because I've been saying it the entire video so far is, a project. It's not a tool, it's not an app, it's something else. And in this case, I think this is a better way of describing it. And if you have the same thing where you're constantly struggling to say the words that you've named something, you probably should consider changing the name of it because it's going to be just as hard for all the users of this to kind of relate to it if the name doesn't match kind of what they're doing in there. So I think this one works a little bit better, and it kind of lines up with our digital resource tracker. So let's go ahead and change the name of that. And let's go ahead and go to all, publish all customizations. Now this can take a little while for publish all customizations, depending on the complexity and the size of your app. This function here can take a little bit, but it's making sure that everything that we've done is all in sync throughout the app. That's essentially what this is doing. So you want to make sure everything's, if you've ever had the problem where you've made a change and you open something up and you don't see the change, go hit the publish all customizations, and that will typically fix that particular problem. Now, in the case of our digital initiatives, what do we have that's a child to this? And it's really just your app details. So let's go ahead and hit the app details. And if we go ahead and scroll over, we have a lookup to our primary tool. All right, so let's go ahead and change this to digital initiative. And then let's copy this so that we can paste it in the next one, because we also have it in app context. So let's go ahead and look at our app context, and we'll edit this and paste. All right, that'll keep everything in our app kind of synced up and aligned. And again, I'll go through and publish all our customizations there. All right, now that that is done, let's go ahead and look at our app for a second and run the solution checker to see if we have any problems. I don't expect us to have any particular problems with this. A lot of times if you use components and you bring those in, sometimes you'll get some issues with components, or if you create some custom pages, maybe you forgot to do your tabs and your accessibility information, you could potentially get some high criticality issues that you need to take a look at. But it's always a good practice to run your solution checker once in a while, just to make sure you're not having any issues with the project that you're putting together. Because you want to make sure to avoid the problem where you're get all this thing done and then you're trying to export it to a different environment and you're going to run into problems. So let's avoid that and run this check here. Just like the publishing of customizations, this step can take a little bit of time. All right, as you can see here, we have no issues identified as our solution check. So I think at this point we are looking pretty good for our app. Now, some other things we might want to take a look at are charts. So let's go to our digital initiatives table here and click on charts and create a new chart. And for selecting this, let's look at completion status, and we just want to count. And we just want a completion status also for here. So what are we going to call this? It'll be based on the active. So we'll just say a completion status summary. And we can always come back in later and modify the setup if we wanted to add, for example, maybe make this a stacked bar chart, for example, where we have more information. But we really don't have a lot of columns to choose from. So right now, they're, maybe we include product type. But I think for right now, we'll just keep it simple. And we'll just create the completion status summary, a very simple chart. So let's go ahead and hit save and close. And then we'll hit done there. So we've got our completion status summary, and you can create as many charts as you want also, but I think that's probably sufficient for our needs, at least for this particular one. Now, if we look at the app details, we might want to have a chart here also. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, and we'll create a new chart here. And then if we look at our app, we have a completion status here. And then we can do the same thing of just selecting completion status for both. That way we'll keep them kind of consistent. So a completion status summary. And we'll hit save and close and hit done. Now in the case of others, we could build other charts for all of these tables, but I think for right now, for our purposes, that's probably a good start. Let's go ahead and enter some data into our app. So let's hit Publish All Customizations to make sure that our charts are available when we get in there. There we go. It's done running that. Let's go ahead and play our app. So we've got our app here. Let's go ahead and enter something in. And for this one, we'll call it our Digital Resources Tracker. That's one we're currently working on. Primarily a Power App. Completion status, we'll call it in development. App tool criticality. Let's go ahead and look for this. We'll call it moderate importance. Now you might be wondering, why are we seeing this down here? Well, let's give it a second. So for the URL for so the URL for the digital initiative could be a team, could be, some sort of a project portal, because it's basically, where the digital initiative is being housed. So for me, usually when I build an app like this, I create a Teams folder and I drop all the assets into it, maybe the images, crow's foot diagram, whatever I've built for that app would go into there. I'd probably put that URL for this. Are additional resources needed? Not at this time. And then this is where you could add all the primary tool notes. And we might want to change the name of this. So we'll have to mark that as something to change here in a few minutes in the back end of this. But what are some notes? So let's describe this. Development of, all right, so we went ahead and said the development of a way to consolidate multiple applications, dashboards, automations, and data sources into a coordinated solution to support digital resource management. The effort focuses on improving efficiency, data visibility, and process consistency by delivering integrated digital tools under a single project umbrella. I think that's sufficient. Let's go ahead and hit the save button here. And now all of a sudden we can see our associated apps, active app contacts, all in here. And through the miracle of editing, I've changed this to be the initiative notes. So we're now set for this. Again, we can't select anything down here yet because we haven't added it in here. So let's go ahead and add our app details. So we'll create a new item here. And again, you can use AI to do this as well. Now, what did we call our name for our application? Is the Digital Resource Tracker. And for our lookup, it'll be the Digital Resource Tracker. And for our completion status, we'll say it's in development. Our environment is Office Solutions Pro. And I'll put the URL in there later. It doesn't really apply, it doesn't apply. And we'll go ahead and find me. So there we go. And I'm the primary developer, so we'll go ahead and find me again. And let's go ahead and hit save. All right, so now we can associate data sources and automations and dashboards with this app. Let's go ahead and do some data source updates. All right, let's go ahead and hit new here. And our first one, we'll call it the app automation joiner. And this is going to be a Dataverse table. So let's do a Dataverse table. Environment or storage location. This is Office Solutions Pro. And then again, I'll do the URLs later. Location administrator is, again, I'm a very busy person. I've got lots of things I got to do. And the owner of this is also going to be me. And what kind of notes can we provide on this particular data source? Again, this is from the data source perspective, not necessarily from the app. Other apps could use this. So that's why we've got the notes inside the joiner table for this. This table is used as a joiner table between app details and automation details. And I think that looks good. All right, so we'll go ahead and hit save. And now if we wanted to, we could add a note in here. So we'll go added entry to table. And I don't think I need any actual notes in there, so we'll hit add notes and close. And there we go. So we've got our first note inside of this particular entry. So now from here, we could just hit the new and move on to the next one. Or we could hit save and close and return to the previous menu. So we can see this is entered in here. And again, I don't have the URL in there. Now, all of these views are fully adjustable. So if you're looking at this, well, you probably don't need all that information all the time. For example, the data source notes. Maybe you don't need all of that in here for this particular view, and you want to kind of summarize it so people aren't seeing everything and getting bombarded with too much information. So you can kind of tailor this to the information that the user actually needs. And you can also create multiple views. So if you want this as kind of a backup, then you can set a more tailored view as the primary. Those are all options. Also, kind of a fun idea for the data source notes. And I did this on a previous app. I created this field here, and then when they added notes to the annotation table, the updates that they do in there, all I did was an automation to update this with that information, because again, that's a separate table. So if you want to display it here, that's a great way to accomplish that through a low code approach. Now, another great way to do this, if you don't want to go through just adding it, the manual option up here, if we come up here, we'll see we have these different options in here. If we go to the export to Excel and we hit open in Excel online, whatever's in your view there, you're going to have access to here, which is another great reason to have everything available right there, because it does make things a little bit easier. If we go ahead and hit the OK there, we can add items directly into here if we want to. All right, so you might have noticed that we left the other view and it's all done. The video in between here, there was an error while recording and it didn't catch any of those aspects, so this part's already done for us. Essentially, all I did was I filled it in with all the different data source details, and then I, hit to import it basically. And one thing I did mention in that video, I want to re-mention here, is that sometimes lookups don't always import. So you got to be kind of careful with lookups. Sometimes, especially since you got to type it in there a lot of times. In this case, all I had to do is kind of drag this down using the Excel functionality, and it had no problems and it was successful. But that is not always the case. So just be kind of cautious when you're working with large amounts of data. Try a couple first just to make sure that you're not going to have any failures. And then if you don't have any failures, feel free to do the rest of them. Just to be kind of cautious with the import function, just to make sure that functions, sometimes when you have the failures, those are kind of hard to work through. So it's better to do imports in small groups just to make sure they don't have any issues. All right, now let's go ahead and do the same thing for our automations. Oh, actually, now that I'm looking at it, we did make a mistake here. So new group, and this is probably something that I should explain how to do. So we're going to change this. We forgot to change the name of this group. So let's go ahead and do that now. So if we go back here and we go into our app, so we can adjust that, we'll see the new group. Let's go ahead and expand this. And let's go ahead and call this core assets. All right, I think that looks pretty good. Let's go check the admin while we're here just to kind of see what this looks like. Yep, same problem here. And let's go ahead and change the name of this group, and we'll call this the admin assets. All right, that looks a little bit better. Let's go ahead and publish that. And as you can see, we've refreshed the app and we can see those changes now. So we've got core assets. And then if we switch over to the admin view, we'll see all of our admin assets. Now, I'm not going to cover this in this video, but you can change the icons associated with each of these tables also, if you prefer doing that. That is an option, as you can change that as well. All right, so automation details next. And again, let's go hit the new button here. And our first name is App Automation Joiner Name Update. And the automation type is Power Automate. Again, I'll do that later. And this is in the Office Solutions Pro. And again, I am the owner. And any notes for this particular automation might include something like this, updates the name field for each new or modified row within the App Automation Joiner table. I think that's probably good, so let's go ahead and hit the Save button here. Oh, looks like we set the URL to required field here, so for the purposes of this, let's just put Google for now, and then I'll update those later. All right, and again, we can click New here if we wanted to add the next record using this interface here, or we can hit the back button here, and we'll hit Save and Continue. So again, we can use this approach up here for adding records, but let's actually go back to our main app interface. And here we go. Now we're back in our main app interface. And let's go ahead and use, and I know this is kind of strange because I'm going to export to Excel in order to do this instead of import from Excel. I kind of feel like this option here for open an Excel line should be in the import option, but it works for both. I use it primarily for importing because it works great for adding new records. So I don't know why they put it in the export because it probably makes more sense in the import because it works great for importing data directly. So all right, hopefully this one, the video won't have an issue with. So let's go ahead and hit the save button here. We've added everything in. And again, for this, all I did was I used the Excel function of dragging down. And I think for these lookups, that works better because if you have a lookup that you have to type in there, oftentimes those will have errors. But let's go ahead and hit save. And then we'll hit track progress so we can actually see what's going on. I always recommend doing the track progress so you can see everything. And as you can see, I use this quite a bit. And yes, I do have errors, and most of these are from lookups. There was an example of when I copied and pasted and didn't have my rows and columns quite aligned, and that caused quite a few errors. Let's go ahead and hit the refresh button. Yeah, we're in the transforming step. So we've got importing and then completed as our next. So we've got 3 and no errors. So that's great. Let's go back here and we'll hit refresh. And we can see we've got all of our records updated in here. We don't have any dashboards, so that's essentially it for our data update. Now, if we come into our digital initiatives, let's go ahead and click here. We've got everything associated currently here correctly, but we didn't add any contacts. So let's go ahead and add a contact here. And the role will be, we'll call it app POC. And this will be, again, myself. And yes, I am the primary contact. And this is where you could add some additional notes about the point of contact or details about, are there other people, for example? You could do that as well. But again, you could just add extra points of contact and we'll hit save here. And there we go. So that is our app POC. So let's go ahead and add one more. And again, this will be for digital resource tracker, and this will be the app maintainer. And again, that'll be myself as well. So we can see what this looks like. And yes, I am the primary point of contact. And let's hit save and close. So when we come back to our main view here, we will see that we have 2 points of contact. One is an app point of contact, one is an app maintainer, and all the information associated with that. And if we need to edit it, we can just click this and we can come back in here and modify it if we need to. Or because it's an editable grid, we can actually make changes right here, fortunately, because it's an editable grid. So that's always an option also. So that is our digital initiative page. And then let's go ahead and look at the app details. And if we go here, let's go look at this app. So let's go ahead and add ours. And you might be thinking, well, isn't it an existing? No, because remember, we created all the automations, but we haven't actually created the links between the app and the automations because this is our joiner table. So let's hit new. And our name is going to be automatic, and we can actually remove that from here. So that might be a modification because it's not something that the user can edit. And then we can add all of our automations. Now in this case, all of our automations, in this case only 4, apply, but we can only add 1. So let's go ahead and do that. And the purpose of this is to update the app automation joiner name field, and we can hit the save button here. And let's go back. So we'll see what that looks like. So now we've got our first one added here. Now, if you like, you could also split this into a, kind of like this, where we've got one column instead of two, and then you could have just one column for each one, and you'd have the full space to view this as well. Now, on a bigger screen, this is going to look a little bit better. So part of it is the technology that your users have. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to view this information. So if you have bigger screens, maybe 4K monitors and that kind of stuff, this actually looks pretty good on a 4K monitor. On a smaller screen like this, it's a little more condensed. So that is always something to take a look at. And if we look at this, we actually made an issue here, right? So this is supposed to be our data sources, but it was our automation. So we designed this incorrectly. So let's go back and fix that quick. So in the app details area, let's click this. And it's possible when we did that relate records, we just didn't catch the issue. So let's go ahead and adjust this main form. That is the problem with that relating the records, where it resets everything. It's kind of, I would say it's a design flaw. So we selected the wrong one here. And again, this is our data sources. So let's reset the component. And then we've got the correct items listed here. So let's go ahead and hit save and publish. Then return to our app and refresh. All right, now everything's looking better. Let's go ahead and add our data source now. So we'll say new app data source. Again, we can remove the name from this. And let's go ahead and hit the search here because we want to pick the first one. And contains PI, no. Security classification, we'll just say internal only. Connection method is a direct connection. And the purpose is joiner table between the app details and automation details. And there we go. Let's go ahead and hit save. And we'll hit the back button. So now we have our data source, we have our automations. We don't have any dashboards, but it's the exact same process. And then we could add notes here at the bottom also for the overall app. And that is essentially how we created our Power application. All right, so this is the final product. I did update the graphics on the side here, so each of these tables has a different kind of an icon. And the other thing I made a change, I went through the app and I just went from a usability and what would I change. And for the most part, everything I kept the same. I did call this initiative contacts, and then I changed the roles to initiative point of contact and project manager because this is a little bit more like a project. So I thought those made a little bit more sense because we do have a field in the app itself for the app point of contact. So I made this more specific to here. Now you could do the exact same process of how we built this table here for the other points of contact within the different areas. So that is also a possibility. Right now, we don't have it set up like that. It's more of just a standard lookup field. But if you wanted more information, you could do that as well. Or if you had the requirement for additional individuals to be added in there, then that would be, again, another resource you would create like this to make that work. Otherwise, you can see that for the most part, our app is working great. And I think it's well organized and it meets the requirements of what we needed to do. As always, if you have a thought on how this could have been done differently or maybe a better approach, feel free to leave the comments. I'm always open to considering other ways to do this. And there are a million different ways that you could handle this, very different approaches, especially if you're going to use plugins, some more coding type stuff in this, then you could definitely come at this from a kind of a different approach. Again, I try to keep this a little more within the realm of what most people could do or would be willing to try to do in their area if they're, say, a government employee or they're kind of like a citizen developer within their organization. I think this is a very reasonable amount of work or knowledge that you could probably handle yourself. And the approaches used in this app work well across multiple app types. So this could be used for a lot of different ways. As always, if you found the content helpful, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It does help this information get out there. Until next time.